Hello there, idea enthusiasts. Boy, have I got a fun episode for you today, absolutely jam-packed with high-level important ideas. Featuring the world's leading Rubinologist, Timbah on Toast. Shout out to patron Thomas Swords for coming up with that term to describe this very new, very serious, very niche field of study and its experts. Anyway, I'm telling you, we will be doing some heavy idea lifting here today, because during this episode, the idea dial was turned to hot. Just a few things I wanted to hit, though, before we dive right into those ideas. Firstly, let me warn you, this is an episode for very online types who are familiar with the skeptosphere. So if my vomiting out the word ideas just now repetitively didn't mean anything to you, you may need to brush up on your Rubinisms. Oh, and this is obviously no safe space for Rubin fans, it should go without saying. And then the other thing I wanted to address is, jokes and everything aside, why do so many of us invest so much time and effort in criticizing someone like Dave Rubin, people like Sam Cedar, Michael Brooks, Timbah, myself? Is it because we're a bunch of meanies who just like to shit on a poor, innocent guy living his own life doing no harm to anyone? Is it comparable, as Joe Rogan said in his interview with David Pakman, to Steven Crowder harassing Carlos Maza? No, obviously not. Crowder is harassing and singling out a journalist, making derogatory comments about his orientation and race. This is in no way similar to criticizing someone's terrible ideas or actions. Bizarrely, Joe claimed Rubin was cognitively limited in that conversation without realizing what an insult to his friend Rubin that was.
Is that different, in your opinion, than someone singling something out for what you believe is their mental incompetency?
Well, that mental incompetent. Do you mean that they're ignorant, or that they're mentally ill or cognitively limited?
Cognitively limited, mocking their ability to think, mocking their intelligence.
Now, I just want to stress that this is a bullshit excuse. Rubin's terrible ignorance and inability to think and promotion of far-right nonsense should absolutely be mocked and criticized mercilessly. That's his politics, not a condition he's suffering with. If it were true that Rubin had some cognitive limitations, then obviously mocking him for his lack of intelligence wouldn't be right. And as much as I despise Rubin and his views and actions, I want to make it clear that if someone were singling him out and criticizing him for his sexual orientation or his Jewish background, I'd be against it, just like I am when Dave's own homophobic buddy, Ben Shapiro, says he wouldn't even attend an anniversary party Dave threw. So, yeah. I just wanted to point out what a bunch of BS that was. It's sad this even needs to be said. I'll stress here again that Dave is a public figure doing massive amounts of harm. He's using his very large platform to promote and sanitize and mainstreamize those who spread hatred against the more vulnerable people in society. And he's doing it incredibly dishonestly and incredibly hypocritically. There is nothing wrong with people pushing back against that or pointing it out. He is a bad actor with a pretty clear agenda and a very large platform with growing political influence and access to real politicians, despite him almost flaunting his lack of intelligence. It's sort of mind-boggling, really, and fascinating, too, in a twisted sense. Like a train wreck you can't look away from. Like he's out there day after day laundering some far-right extremists with a sprinkling of just enough normal mainstream gas to give him some sort of cover in front of those who aren't as familiar with him and to draw more people in, eventually pushing the most gullible further and further right, while he claims to be totally not right-wing. So yeah, these are some of the reasons why people spend so much time critiquing and quote-unquote exposing Rubin. There's more and more people interested in doing that every day, so I guess Dave's friends are really scraping the bottom of the barrel for excuses. And that's why you get situations where his own pals are saying he's cognitively limited. Yikes. All right. Hope you guys enjoy the episode and find the conversation as cathartic as I did. As always, if you enjoy the show and would like to see it survive and thrive, please consider supporting via Patreon. This show doesn't exist without listeners like you. Oh, and when I hit my next Patreon goal, I'll be starting work on a post-mortem episode revisiting my previous conversation with Sam Harris and commenting on it from a 2019 perspective. So help me get there and we'll get that project started. Now, the episode.
Make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, ex-Muslim host Aina, keeping it non-controversial. Welcome to episode 55 with Timbah on Toast. He created a Dave Rubin dunking trilogy that is beyond thorough, that is a cut above all other Dave Rubin dunking. And I'll link to it in the show notes. If you haven't seen it already, please do check it out. And Timbah, where can people follow your work?
So the YouTube channel is timbah.on.toast. And my Twitter handle is @TimbahOnToast, all one word jammed together with no dots.
Awesome. Okay, so follow Timbah there, and thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
Your videos have been awesome. Aside from just the dunking on Dave Rubin, like the production is so slick and the music is sexy. It's great. Like the whole aesthetic, it's got this really great vibe to it, you know?
That's really nice to hear. I think with my videos, all of it stems around wanting to make very simple points about something which I think is obvious to most people. Along the way, if I was just doing that, I feel like it would be quite boring for me to create such a thing. So that's why all the other elements ended up coming in that I think perhaps is what might intrigue people who aren't necessarily into the political side of it so much.
So tell me a bit about yourself. Who are you and what prompted you to do a whole 3-part series on Dave Rubin?
Okay, so I guess I have always had this kind of interest in the YouTube of sort of lefty creators of videos. I think a lot of that stems from the Trump election and landing in this kind of strange world one night of, I think in one night I discovered Sargon of Akkad and then straight away landed in the skeptic sphere.
Oh dear.
And I don't know. I found it all quite a curious experience of discovering lots of pro-Trump viewpoints amongst people who were all calling themselves liberals. And it was very strange to me. And through kind of watching loads of those people, I then stumbled upon, I think it was H-Bomber Guy first, and then all the people debunking them. And at that moment was like, it all seems kind of like carefully curated, this liberal sphere of YouTube that supports Donald Trump. So from there, obviously, I very quickly discovered Dave Rubin. And my first thoughts when I watched him interviewing Milo were kind of like this strange feeling of not any sort of indignation or negative feelings towards him, but a sense of, this is a very strange thing I'm observing, and what actually am I watching? I've seen Milo's YouTube channel, and I saw him get interviewed by Dave, and there was very little difference in what he was saying because there was nothing coming from Dave at all. And I kind of wondered why Dave was bothering to interview him if it was just a pure Milo monologue that we could enjoy on Milo's channel. So that was how,
yes.
so that was how I ended up landing on this world. And sort of, I suppose I haven't created videos until I literally did the series on Dave, but by that point I watched a load of videos on YouTube, knew how they worked, knew kind of the way people were presenting arguments, and that I think that was my in.
So give me a timeline. Like, around when did you discover Sargon, and then Rubin, and then the people that were debunking him?
So Sargon was first, and that probably would have been 2015.
Okay.
And then we had some black guy. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I have, yeah.
Some black guy. It's weird. Now I kind of like him.
Really?
In a weird way, where he makes videos where he doesn't really justify any of his opinions. He's just like, I don't know, this seems okay to me. Does that sound okay to you? Yeah, it's fine. So he doesn't actually he'll say, oh, Trump, well, yeah, I guess there's some things about him that are bad, but also maybe he's fine. And it's kind of like a funny experience of just like, oh, I guess he's just, he's just leaving it to the comment section to decide on all of these videos.
So he's so I don't watch his videos or anything, but the sense that I get is that he's like a Candace Owens, kind of like on the right.
But he's not as sure of himself, I guess, or rather he's very much in the video game playing, everything is okay kind of sphere. So the YouTube creators who I guess they ride along chuckling at every single thing that happens in society and don't really have that much investment in anything. What they do, I guess, often is kind of give the appearance of being on the right. I often with these people don't know whether they are or not, because I think it's a big part of it is them leaning into their audience massively. And
so you mean you don't know if they're authentically on the right or if they're just drifting?
That's it. And I think with Candace Owens, at some level, she probably isn't completely invested in the ideology she's espousing a lot of the time. With her, I often get this really funny feeling that she's wants to appeal to the, I guess, younger black listeners that she might have, but then trying to marry that with this very heavily conservative, I would say, very traditional family, regressive ideology. So I'll give you an example. When I saw Candace Owens on the Joe Rogan podcast, at one point in the interview, she talks about Chris Rock, and she says, and the thing is, when he was making jokes, nobody cared. It was just funny. Nothing was off limits. Everything was fine. And she's like, you couldn't have a character like Chris Rock now. Now, this to me is an appeal to the cool kind of, black audience that she might have. And then later in the interview, she says, well, it is not funny that we have Joy Behar making jokes about Christians. That is not funny. And you can look back at a Chris Rock comedy sketch and find Chris Rock dissing Christianity.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of like, well, wait, you enjoyed his stuff back then, doing the exact thing that you're now saying is wrong and bad and weird. That's what I always find. Because she's trying to do both things at once, she ends up having these contradictory positions. With Candace Owens, you don't even need to delve into her arguments. You just clip random things of her and she'll just contradict herself all the way through.
It's not just her though, right? Don't you find that generally on the right, and even like the IDW Quillette sphere kind of?
Well, I think with the IDW, it's difficult with people like Brett and Eric, because they never really go far enough to committing to any idea that's political in a strong way. I would say so. They will,
which is what Dave started off with as well, right? If you notice, that's like a thing. Like, give yourself enough wiggle room to walk it back.
Yeah, but the problem that I think Dave had, and the corner he got into, was because the sheer volume of content he's put on the internet of himself talking to people is immense.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought, yes, he does sit on the fence, and yes, he does kind of not commit. But this is where I found was his undoing. There's so much of him doing that. that you can delve into the rare times he expresses an idea, and then there's so much there to then look through and say, wait a minute, that like you have kind of sealed your own demise here because you keep being on the internet.
You mean like for people to find contradictory positions and stuff? Like severely contradictory positions?
That's it. I think this was my whole motivation behind making a stupidly long video series about him, was whenever there was a criticism of Dave Rubin levied by, I guess, a journalist who you can imagine was writing one of their many articles about a variety of topics and wrote something about him being critical of the way he'd interviewed a certain person or a few people, he always had the comeback of, I've done hundreds and hundreds of hours of interviews, which he has, and you're cherry picking these 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 interviews. And if you watch the rest of my content, you would realize that you've got this completely wrong. And no journalist who's writing about varied topics and has a busy journalist schedule is then going to go back to Dave's channel and watch everything to see if they were right, because why would they? So the whole motivation behind me doing the videos was, I have loads of time and I've already watched a lot of Dave Rubin's stuff just through, I think...
You've done a public service, a great public service.
Well, I guess morbid curiosity makes me watch Dave's show quite a lot. So I already had some stuff in my head where I was like, well, there's a lot of stuff there to go at. But then, when I actually delved into it, I observed patterns that I perhaps hadn't even expected. What I realized was the critique that everyone was levying at Dave, I think, was wrong, in that they were purely looking at the extremist guests he interviewed and only using that in their criticism of him. So they would only round in on the very kind of controversial guests who had checkered pasts, and they were saying, this is what's bad about the show. I know that he sometimes has conversations with other people, but we're going to focus on this. Why that's wrong is, when you watch a whole load of Rubin Report content, what you realize is there is a Rubin Report funnel through which every interview goes through. And this doesn't matter if the interview is with Stephen Fry or if it's with Stefan Molyneux. They all go through the same Rubin Report funnel. And what this is Dave himself is equipped to talk about only a handful of topics. And not only that, but he knows his audience wants to hear about those topics. So this has an effect at the end of his guests, which is academic philosophers, so Lawrence Krauss, Yanis Varoufakis, people who have, I guess, legitimate academic credentials, or that they're legit intellectuals. The effect that the Rubin Report funnel has on these people is that they will try and talk to Dave about their specialist subject areas, and the conversation will be bottlenecked because Dave can't match them step for step and go into those topics. So what Dave does is he goes and has this defensive mechanism where he'll draw the topics back into what he knows. So let's say they're talking about...
which is like 3 things.
Yeah, exactly. So they'll be talking about economics or something, and he'll say, well, don't you think the left's got that wrong then? And I can imagine the guest being in a situation where they're like, what? I don't, what? I mean, I'm not talking about left and right, I'm just talking about economics. And I think that's the bottleneck effect it has. And then you can look at that same problem, so the Rubin Report funnel, and look at what it does to the extremist guests. And he does the same thing where, let's say they have a really controversial idea. So in the case of Stefan Molyneux, we can talk about ethno-nationalism. Dave doesn't feel comfortable going into that more controversial area with the guest. So he'll bring the conversation back to some tepid conversation about the role the guest plays in triggering the left. which then means that the actual controversial ideas, which should be the bread and butter of his show, aren't discussed, nor are they even brought up. And I think it's the same problem that works its way into every interview. It's not just the bad ones that are bad. It's also the good guests that get a 6 out of 10 interview or a 5 out of 10 interview.
But he does discuss things like, brain size differences with, say, Molyneux, and how Jews are responsible for creating the Nazi Party in Canada with Lauren Southern, and the hair-splitting differences between white nationalism and white supremacy with Lauren Southern.
Yeah, but I would
high-level important ideas there.
My brain was still in recovery mode. No, I think you could challenge that and say he doesn't discuss those things because.
Ooh, really?
Because if we were going to discuss brain sizes, I mean, one person would volunteer an idea about them, and then I would say, what backs that up? Why do you think they have that size? I might contribute the alternative viewpoint of, well, there's these other measures being done that shows that's not the route, or maybe scientists don't actually look at that to explain that. Right. They would look at other things. That would be discussing that idea, because then you would then flesh it out and work out if it actually held water. So I think that's the point that maybe a lot of people on the left miss.
That Dave Rubin is like a bobblehead. He's adding nothing.
Is that even the controversial ideas aren't really being discussed?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess for the people who've been so desperate to see those ideas in the mainstream, just having them dropped in to a big show like that has massive exposure. It's like a huge win, right? Even if you're not actually, I guess, dissecting those ideas and talking about them for ages, because Dave simply can't talk about anything for ages.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's more the sanitization of them and presenting them as something else. I think that's the big problem. It's more because he cloaks what they are with vaguely liberal values, and will use, I guess, legitimate arguments in a way. We should listen to different points of view. That's a general idea that people can agree with. We shouldn't defame people because of one or two bad things they've done. I guess that's an idea that we, as well, everyone would agree with.
Depending on what the bad thing is, like if it's like murder or wanting genocide, then go ahead, I say.
And that's the problem, is what the bad thing is what he hides.
Right, exactly. Hey, Tommy Robinson, are you an anti-Muslim bigot? No.
Well, that's the thing. And I think, again, Tommy Robinson, he's a textbook example of someone who, I think, like you said, the part of your conversation with Sam Harris that I quoted in my video, the fact that he can switch, the way he talks depending on who he's in front of, is something that gives him a lot of wiggle room whenever charges are levied against him. If he can find one example where he's been moderate and point to that and say, look at this, where was I controversial in this clip here? Then he's already kind of got people in the audience thinking, oh yeah, he's right. And you know what? We should be able to criticize Islam, and people who are already invested in that cause have not much reason to really disbelieve him, I guess.
So back to the timeline thing for a second. So you found Sargon around 2015, and then when did you come to Dave Rubin?
Dave Rubin would have been his interview with Milo, which I think for a lot of people was what put the Rubin Report on the map, right?
Was that 2016?
2016, yeah. So it wasn't. I think he did an interview with Milo at the end of 2015. Then he had him back on in 2016. And
that was after the Tommy Robinson one, or?
I think it would have been after, yeah. And at this point, Dave Rubin, I didn't really understand the whole phenomenon of what I was seeing. It was just a kind of nothing interview style for me. And I was thinking, well, this probably isn't a show that I'm going to watch. And then I think the thing was, he just kept coming up. It was like whenever you'd see clips of of any controversial person saying something negative about feminism, you'd then see the camera pan out and this guy Rubin would be there sitting opposite them. I think this is totally a point you could make, is that using those people like Milo and people like Paul Joseph Watson, who have massive social media followings, in essence, was really what got him in the limelight, because those videos got massive kind of sharing potential, because they give you a lot of little soundbite things that are like, anti-PC talking points. And then Rubin was always the guy in the background, just sort of, just there. And so through that, he then tied his name together with this cause, which otherwise, because Dave Rubin himself didn't have any colourful opinions, and if you listen to the way Rubin talks, he's not especially kind of shocking or, for that reason,
not
engaging.
at all, yeah. He's so dull.
That's it. He's just very like, well, we talk about this and then we get this. And he wouldn't have that potential without these guests being there on his show. And so I think if we then progress to like later 2016, by this point I'd seen an awful lot of Dave Rubin. And that was also when he'd become very forthcoming in his support for Donald Trump. It wasn't like it was hidden anymore. So I kept seeing him saying about liberalism and these values. And for me, it was clear to pretty much anyone that was either centrist or on the left that what he was representing himself as wasn't necessarily true. Because, our values don't come out in the little monologues we give about them. They come out in the way we act day to day and, the kind of causes we get behind. So, yeah, I think the point where the Ask Me Anything happened was when...
the famous one where everyone dunked on him on his own Reddit, right?
That was where I became fascinated by him rather than just being aware of him. Because at that stage, if you look at the Ask Me Anything, it was so civil and polite, the way that people were asking him questions. And all of the people asking questions all seem to be coming from a very genuine place. Many of them saying that they watched a lot of his interviews. Many of them saying that they supported this cause that he had created on YouTube for, upholding free speech and discussing ideas, but all of them with these questions that kind of cut to the heart of, but how good is your platform for actually doing these things? We have our doubts. And I think seeing Dave giving nothing responses to all of those questions or avoiding them completely, at that point, I was like, okay, so I guess he's going to witness a drop in subscribers at this point, because anyone that's behind the cause at this point can see that he's not actually, he's not up for debate. He's not willing to debate any of his ideas. He's not able to defend any of his interviews. He's just going to shirk the responsibility of it. And then to see his subscriber base grow like tenfold after that, I was like, wow.
So who do you think he's appealing to now?
Now it's a really, really different time than what we had even a year ago, I think. Because I think for a long time, this is another thing that I think people perhaps were a bit of a smokescreen for us on, is we are very acutely aware of all of the controversial guests who've been on the Rubin Report. And the reason for that is because we follow those controversial people as, I guess, people who oppose them very strongly. So we all know who Stefan Molyneux is. We all know who Tommy Robinson is. And all these guests that he's had on, Lauren Southern, Bridget Gabriel, we all have an interest to some level of hearing those people, because we very strongly oppose, what they stand for and the kind of messages they give. normal people who just tune into YouTube on a kind of casual basis have no idea who those people are, genuinely. Like, they would not know who Stefan Molyneux is.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. Like, my real life friends have no idea of who these people are.
Absolutely no clue. And so when you bring up arguments of, but he did this controversial interview, that carries really no water for the vast majority of people. It really doesn't matter. And what they see Dave being on his show is very civil, balanced to an extent in the way he answers questions.
But don't you think, like, okay, if they don't know Stefan Molyneux or Milo or whatever, but still people like Tommy Robinson, people like Paul Joseph Watson, InfoWars, those people are now like sort of leaking into the mainstream. People know who they are for sure.
Sure, but I think
not for good reasons.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And Tommy Robinson, especially in England.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what you can point to is his audience is probably not mainly England people. It's probably people in the US, right?
Because of people like Dave Rubin helping him sort of
that's it. And
rebrand and sanitize. And there was a part in that Tommy Robinson video where Dave was like, oh yeah, Pegida, it doesn't sound like a hate group at all.
But that's the thing. It's like it's like the information he knows is only what is said in the interviews, thus leaving his worldview to be entirely formulated by what he's told by the person in front of him, which
is like something a 6-year-old could do, like interview like that.
Yeah, and also when you think about it, if you think about anyone that's involved in politics on any level, you would look into things, right? You would. And that's I've always felt that it was a bit of a charade that he didn't know things about guests. Mm-hmm. I strongly believe that he does know all the controversies. Maybe
not even all, but some at least, surely.
Yeah. And so, I think what was lacking before, and this is why I talk about him having this, wider audience of people that don't know about these guests, is what was lacking was the evidence to establish that there were patterns in the way he was interviewing that consistently did the same thing of misrepresenting guests and viewpoints. Mm-hmm. So when I went into this, I think there was some videos about Dave Rubin on YouTube, but I felt that they were also short and they all dealt with such specific things that for any general person watching, that wouldn't be enough to really establish that Rubin was a bad interviewer, because they're not actually going into all of his interviews. So what I was mainly aiming to do was, if I can show people 7, 8, 9, 10 examples of something, of him doing the same thing that leads to the same effect on, misrepresenting a viewpoint and leading his audience to a certain conclusion, at that point, you can no longer say that it's a one-off. It's a pattern. Mm-hmm. It's like a pattern of behavior that he does consistently. Mm-hmm. And I felt like, if people can walk away from that and say, well, I still fully support him, that's fine. At least now you know the arguments against him and you know that they hold water because there are the examples.
Mm-hmm. But in a way, I feel like the people that want to support him, like they've always known what the arguments against him are, but they always have like some dishonest comeback. I'm sure you've also gotten like Rubin fans like still telling you that you're being dishonest, you're misrepresenting, or right? Yeah.
Well, the biggest one is this. This is the one that I get all the time, and I brought it upon myself entirely. If you don't like him, don't watch him. And I'm like, okay, I guess, yeah. Obviously, because I've spent so long watching him.
So roughly how much time did you spend watching him?
I would say close to 100 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Because this is the thing, is the way I actually approached this video, I had the whole thing written from the start. Because the whole thing was made up of me watching hours and hours of Rubin Report videos, and every time he'd do something that was contradictory or false or I guess went against the principles that he'd laid out for the show, I just noted it down, did a timestamp, and I kept doing it and kept watching more and more and more. And I ended up with like 100 pages of notes. What I didn't know was, because I'd never made a YouTube video before, 20 pages of notes equals like an hour of video. So when I went to make the video, I realized it was going to be 7 hours long or something. So that was when I had to then, it can't be one video, it has to be 3. And so I went about restructuring it and classifying the kind of errors, faults into categories of, different genres of dishonesty. And then
different genres of dishonesty. That's a beautiful Dave Rubin takeaway lesson there.
So yeah, that's how I ended up with the 3 instead of just 1. It was always meant to be 1, but it was too long.
Dave Rubin gave you too much to criticize.
Yeah. But also that what I was saying before, so that criticism of if you don't like him, don't watch him, I think if we're using that, then okay, have you ever criticized a film that you didn't like and said reasons you didn't like it?
It's the dumbest thing. Sorry, but it is.
If you didn't like it, you don't watch it. You ever criticized a video game you didn't like?
And all the people saying this are like, obsessed with criticizing feminism or Islam. It's like, if you don't like it, just don't be a feminist or don't be Muslim.
That's it. So that's the argument I get the most often. And it's kind of like, if we live in this world where not liking something equals, just don't be involved in it, then no one's allowed to criticize anything ever. And there's no point in saying any opinions about anything ever.
Right. Definitely Dave Rubin shouldn't criticize the left because he left the left.
Don't be part of it.
Right. He's made a whole video saying he isn't. But then if you call him right wing, he's going to sue you. Yeah.
Well, I also, this is the thing as well. He's such a memeable guy.
He really is. He's a clown.
And that's the thing, is that has in itself led to a kind of atmosphere now where he's so easy to just clip a little thing of and be like, wow, that is so Dave Rubin. And he's got his own brand of tomfoolery, hasn't he, in the things he says? Because he mentions the word ideas so much that you can find it in any interview and it'll always be in some bizarre context.
Right. And a couple of years ago, it was regressive left, regressive. And it was like every video of his had like 50 of these regressive left. And I used to think, surely his audience has got to get bored of him talking about the same thing again and again and again. How long can it last? Well,
that's it. And I think
they love it. They love to be told what they want. It's like a toddler almost, wanting repetition. The same storybook all the time. The left is bad, and the left is bad, and feminists are bad, and we all lived happily ever after without them.
Well, I think what you get is a list of cameos of people from different areas. So let's say they're a historian. It'll be like, here's a historian. Why are leftists bad from a historical perspective? And let's say it's an economist. It's like, why are the leftists bad from an economic perspective? It's just like, it's like, what role is this new guest going to play?
Why are the left bad from a skull-shaped perspective?
In like, the left is bad, the musical.
Oh God, that'd be fantastic! Can you imagine? Oh, I'd love it.
But that's what I think the show has kind of become, and I think this is also the reason why you now have Quillette even
Quillette, yes,
because he's damaging their brand, and that's actually true. Is in order for this to work, you have to maintain a veneer of intellectual curiosity and intellectualism, and I think he's blowing it for them.
He is, and for the IDW, but they're a bit slower to realize. Considering they're the greatest intellectuals of our times, it's weird that almost everyone realizes what a dumbass Dave Rubin is, except for them.
Well, I think they totally do. I think they really do. Like, okay.
So, okay, hold on. So do you think it's because they truly are the greatest intellectuals of our time that they realize, or because really even the right-wingers realize now?
I recently saw a video of Sam Harris doing a town hall where Eric Weinstein comes on halfway through, and Eric Weinstein says, he said, I just feel like with criticism, I've been deprived of good criticism. So I feel like I'm, playing this game against a bad tennis player. I'm not at my best. And then he says, I recently saw a commentary on one of the members of the IDW who gave a breakdown in very sort of precise and articulate way and heartfelt way their problems with this person, and a lot of the points landed. And he then said, and this person said about Tommy Robinson, that it was the way he presented himself in different situations. Eric Weinstein has watched the vids, and I don't think that you would sit and watch. He clearly watched like all three, because I'm assuming if he got to the Tommy Robinson one, which is the longest one, you're not going to do that first. So I think he probably, I'm not going to say he has negative opinions about Rubin, but I don't think that they are oblivious to the charade that is the Rubin Report and the kind of show he runs.
But Sam Harris also recently, I guess by recently I mean, I think in the last 6 months, was asked specifically about Rubin in an interview, and he specifically praised Rubin's interviewing techniques. And till Rubin still had a Patreon, he used to fund Rubin's Patreon. And I know you heard my conversation with Sam Harris. I asked him over and over again in different ways with different examples. I tried my best. Like, trust me, I was hoping for him to come out of that. And I don't know. I wanted to keep respecting him, but it was very hard to do. Like,
well, this is the problem, I think, that the more articulate and intellectual thinkers that espouse right-wing talking points have to deal with is that in order for you to maintain credibility in a general sense, you have to be willing to call out the bad actors on your side,
right,
who definitely aren't doing as good a job as you of espousing those viewpoints. And
right, and especially when you call on others to call out the bad actors on their sides all the time.
That's it. I think in order for you to maintain credibility, you've got to be capable of doing that. And I think now, whatever people say about traditional media, this is the main problem with new media and YouTube, is that we have these different circles of people all sharing each other's content, all appearing on each other's podcasts. And they're very reticent to condemn anyone in that circle when they do something untoward or something which they, in terms of their own principles, have a problem with. And I guess we see this on all sides in different ways, but with the intellectual dark web particularly, because of the values they talk about all the time, I think it's a bigger bone of contention for people. Because
that's exactly it.
Because if you're, I mean, for someone who is a complete blockhead, either a blockhead leftist or a blockhead conservative who's just going to toe the party line all the time, people aren't really bothered, because it's like, oh, well, we know what we're getting with you. That's fine. We can either what. But I think when you get people talking about this kind of marketplace of ideas and talking about how we need to almost clean up the state of public discourse and debate, you have to be willing to do it yourself. You can't just say to everyone else to do it and use it as like shield for your own publicity and that stuff without actually doing it yourself.
Or if you're going on about how you're above tribalism, how you're the only objective, rational person out there, everyone else is biased, and then if you're gonna have these obvious biases, people are gonna be more pissed off about that because you're the one claiming to be above it all. The average right winger or left winger isn't claiming to be so super rational.
That's it, and I think that's the main reason why they attract so much criticism. They're often, I guess, they have the appearance of seeming completely bamboozled by it all. It's like, why are people asking me to do X? And it's like, it's because that's meant to be what you're all about. I think it's kind of subtle hypocrisy of what you're running.
Not so subtle, but yeah. So you didn't come to this through the online atheist direction, did you?
No, I mean, I'll be honest. I would say all the way through my teenage years and into my, into the last few years, I was never really invested in politics to any degree. Mm-hmm. I think like many people, in this bubble of thinking that society's just going to carry on progressing and there's never ever going to be any repeals of any gains that people have made in civil rights or any of these areas. So I don't really need to worry about that stuff. I can just keep enjoying music and all the stuff that I do. In a weird way, it was seeing that skeptic community of kind of Sargon of Akkad and all affiliated people growing on YouTube was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm completely out of touch with everything that's actually going on. That was true to a certain extent. I had no idea that...
But you're not an ex-fan or anything of any of them?
No, I've always been, actually, all the way through uni, I was really annoyed by feminists. And I was actually really annoyed by, people who... Oh, okay, so I used to be really non-PC, I guess. I used to use, the F word to describe gay people. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if it was, I guess you're not that old, but in the 90s, a lot of people did. But
yeah, and I think it's because I grew up watching loads of South Park, and they basically did an episode on why saying that word was totally okay, and anyone that gets offended was a stupid idiot. And I really took that to heart as a kid. I was like, that's legit.
Goes to show how much damage South Park did. And didn't it come out that the creators are Republicans too?
I don't know. I think they're just kind of people who want to watch the world burn, the guys who made it. But I think by the time I was discovering this community online, I was already 21. So you've gone through enough of, I guess, social groups and encountering different people of different walks of life, that when you land in a skeptic community, they're not necessarily just defending your right to use those words. I could instantly tell that it was something that went way beyond that, and there was definitely undertones of racism to everything they were saying where I definitely wasn't on board with it.
Mm-hmm. So you were an anti-PC type of person that still was skeptical of these anti-PC people, is what you're saying.
Well, it's more like all I wanted was the right to say the F word for gay people.
That's all?
That was it. So all it was, I guess, was my right to say certain words and then not be called out. So I'd get annoyed whenever a feminist or someone said, wait a minute, you've just used the word gay to mean stupid. That's not right. And I'd be like, what right do you have to tell me that? That's the kind of person I guess I still am that kind of person to a certain extent, but you understand. So the N word is bad. And then you're like, I somehow conditioned my brain not to say that. How do I do that?
You didn't want the right to say that one?
No. And I was like, okay, so if I am sort of clever enough to somehow not say the N word, why can I not apply that logic to this F word that seems to really get under people's skin, and people genuinely seem kind of upset by it. But it was almost like I had to come to that conclusion on my own without someone hectoring me about it and saying, well, what you've done is bad, and, in this kind of moralizing way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the pathway that a lot of us who are left-wing creators on YouTube take, is in response to people who make right-wing content where it can often be quite hectoring, where it's a diatribe of bullet point list why feminism is bad, why it's ruining your life, this is so bad, these people are disgusting. I think we have to respond to it with a argument that doesn't necessarily ever attack people, but slowly walks you through our thinking on things. And that's our only real way of persuading people, is to somehow make them get to the conclusion on their own without necessarily saying that anything about their own thinking is bad or wrong.
So you think that's a good way to do it?
It's the only way.
It's the only way to do it, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I was there at one point. I agree with you. I mean, I agreed with you at like, you remind me of me a few years ago, where I wanted to be patient and try to patiently explain these things to people and talk it out with Tommy Robinson and try to get Sam Harris to see why these things are bad and, have all these conversations, talk to Robert Spencer on my podcast and all of that. But now, I mean, after I've done all of that and I've seen that it didn't do anything. Tommy Robinson just modifies his views for who he's or he did, at least. I think now he's a bit more open about not having turned over a new leaf. The time I spoke to him, he was like, "Oh, I've left the EDL and I'm changing, and this was Tommy Robinson new era and all of that." So I wanted to sort of extend a hand to him. And looking back, I feel like that was just it was silly. I don't know.
Well, I think the one thing that is perhaps very obvious now, which wasn't at the time, is the EDL was the way it was for a reason, right? Like, the EDL was a group where violence would follow them everywhere. And you'd always have these altercations with the police. You'd always have kind of Nazi sympathizing people within that movement. And that didn't come out of nowhere. If the problem is that a nuanced argument against Islam doesn't get people out in the streets. If you're someone who is trying to get people to come and march with you, and you're like, right, guys, we need to make a really carefully considered argument about the parts of this holy book that are really having a bad effect on society, that's really not going to work, is it, to get people motivated? Whereas if you are someone who can sort of harness, I guess you could definitely call them racist kind of rhetoric, and then backtrack whenever you're asked in interviews and go back to the holy book stuff. That's very, very good. Like, that's a really good strategy, because you can be one thing to your followers and another thing to the media.
Yep. I wanted to talk to you about like how once you unravel Dave Rubin, if you can sort of see that theme throughout the whole IDW and how they will carry water for Tommy Robinson and stuff like that, but then they'll leave themselves enough wiggle room, say, I didn't know enough about him, but let me hear, criticize his critics and stuff like that. So that was like one of my criticisms of your, I think it was your first or second video, where you talked about Joe Rogan and Eric Weinstein in like a more positive light. And I was there too. Like I would think, I guess, before that in comparison to Rubin, Joe Rogan is a great interviewer because he'll actually push back at times.
Sure. So yeah, this is everything in the videos is all very carefully crafted and considered to be persuasive to Dave Rubin's audience.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
So I have my own criticisms of Joe Rogan, but for the purpose of the Rubin criticism, I always had my mind on, what are the positive things that we can talk about in podcasts? Now, if you compare Dave Rubin to David Pacman, who's on the left and is very, very kind of... he's got a big presence on YouTube. Everyone on the right would know who he is. Everyone on the IDW would know who he is. Probably dislike him, I'd imagine. If my criticism is founded on comparing Dave Rubin to David Pacman, automatically any of Rubin's viewers are going to be locked out of it because they're instantly going to think, well, he's just praising the left one and dissing our guy.
Okay.
So if I can, the criticisms I have about Rubin, formulate them around people that his audience like and enjoy listening to, that's suddenly 10 times more compelling. Because I think often Rubin and Rogan are lumped in as being essentially the same platform. I think there are differences to point out, and they're worthwhile differences to point out. So the fact that Rogan doesn't just have political conversations with right-wingers, the fact that he has comedians, I guess Neil deGrasse Tyson, people who don't really fit into any category, Hannibal Buress, the fact that he does that is something that says something about the variety of content you're going to see on his show. It automatically points you to a more varied show.
Yeah.
I mean,
but there is a huge right-wing component there as well. But yeah, You're right. It's definitely different from Rubin, and I guess it's better. So that is worth pointing to when trying to convince Rubin viewers. Yeah, definitely I can respect that. But yeah, like I was saying, somewhere along the way, like I started off really trying to speak with these people and engage with their ideas, and I got like no honest engagement back, and just like a bunch of dishonest criticisms and what you refer to as Martin Bailey's, and you know, so I lost my patience. Now, like, I just don't have the patience to sit and endlessly engage with like a Sam Harris fan, or of which I used to be one, you know, like I'm an ex Sam Harris fan. So I know his content very well. I know his rhetorical tricks. So when people are like, oh, you just don't know him well enough, I'm like, no, I've known him well enough for years. And that's how I came to these conclusions. I've just lost the patience.
Yeah, I completely understand. I think it's as well the way that this environment that we're in of Twitter amps up anything to like 1,000 times the level of conflict that it would be if it was an actual real life conversation. I really enjoy going through precise details of an argument with someone online. This might end.
I was there. Believe me, I was there.
I think the thing that you've always got to consider is that you're not really engaged in the dialogue for the sake of the person you're speaking to. It's always that some neutral observer.
Right. Exactly.
Is going to be watching and forming their opinions based on what they're seeing. Now, if they see a consistent pattern, and let's say for the sake of argument, they're like, you know, just floating about, they don't really have a political belief. But if they keep seeing people who identify as left-wingers being really patient online and being really meticulous and thorough in the way they present their viewpoints, having solid reasons, if they're criticizing the right, having solid reasons for those criticisms, that overall will have an effect on making them think, these people, they really aren't that bad. You know, I've heard a lot of stuff about...
Certainly, but after the 900th time, you're kind of like... So, and I still do it sometimes. So, for example, I was engaging with Eric Weinstein yesterday, who proceeded to accuse me of trifling with genocidal impulses, and send like a whole lot of racists and white nationalist apologists into my mentions. And for what, you ask? I said to like, basically like, what? You're upset about BuzzFeed listicles that are criticizing whiteness? Like, he was calling them evil, and he was sort of flattening the concept of racism as like, you know, I'm against all racism, but, you know, he kept bringing up anti-white racism as being, you know, so evil. And I'm like, dude, that's not really a major concern in the West, right?
Well, the problem is with the ideals they espouse, that shouldn't really be a valid argument. Because if your argument is that BuzzFeed and Vox and general liberal media have been going too hard on social justice, and that's turned people into white nationalists, then you can easily make the counter argument that there being an increased presence of white nationalists just increases the amount of social justice warriors.
Right. Never goes that way. Or, justify jihadism or justify, people going into movements like BLM, which they have no tolerance for, which they call divisive identity politics.
That's the problem, is the arguments, if we're going into that realm of trying to defend the most heinous and violent people of our political side, then there's always just an equal and opposite counter argument.
Sorry, I want to make clear I'm not equating BLM with jihadism or white nationalism.
I wouldn't either. No.
Yeah, I didn't mean to do that. I just meant to put it forth as an example of something that they won't tolerate when they have all the charitableness for white nationalism.
No, man, BLM's going to hear about this. You're cancelled.
Oh, well, I've always got one foot in the canceled thing because ex-Muslim, right? So
yeah, true.
People always assume I'm like the Breitbart kind of ex-Muslim when they don't know me, and I'm really not. That whole movement has unfortunately gone to shit. Like, I don't know if you followed it or whatever, but it started off as a very noble, let's destigmatize apostasy from Islam because it should be destigmatized.
Oh,
and then
yeah, of course.
It became a very Diamond and Silk and Candace Owens-like situation fast.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, by the time I was tuned into this stuff, I think it had already gone to the place that you're describing. I think there is definitely reasons to criticize Islam, and we need to be honest about what those are. This is why I see David Pakman as a really good person, I guess as a representative of the left, because he's able to criticize the bad actors on our own side like a measured, proportioned way, where his values don't seem to shift completely to the extreme right by doing so. And actually, I was really, really thankful that I had examples of him interviewing Richard Spencer, for example, to make my arguments in my video.
I've recommended that interview a lot, too. It's a great interview because he does not let Richard Spencer get away with anything. Like, he will dig out his views, expose them to his audience.
Well, this is what he did that was really, really good, I think, is what white nationalists tend to do is pivot to something quite abstract. So you'll be talking to them and in their minds, they're like, yep, we're going to get rid of all the minorities. But what they'll say is, I just care about, our nation, people who were born and raised here. I care about maintaining the sovereignty of our country. All of these values that are very general, and I guess everyone, to a certain extent, can sympathize with. And what David Pakman did in that interview with Richard Spencer, whenever you sense him going into that abstract world of honor and noble values, David Pakman's like, so who would be deported from the ethno-state? Which people? And how do we decide who those people are? And he kept drilling down into the details of the end result of Richard Spencer's belief, if everyone accepted it as something that was going to happen. And I think that's what, if we're going to talk about our boy Rubes, what he can't do is he can't nail them on the specifics.
Well, he also doesn't want to. Like, he wants to polish their views up. He wants to hide the bad parts for them. Like, was it ContraPoints that phrased something like about how I forget who she was talking about, but something about them cradling bigotry gently, like it's like a baby bird or something. It was beautifully phrased. I'm not doing it justice, but that's what he does. That's what a lot of the IDW people do, in my view, is that their function is to sort of soften all the bigotries that are actually a problem and exaggerate the SJWs. Yeah, well,
I think this is the thing that I also, maybe a slightly new point that I brought with my video. Most of the points I make are things that I think everyone has been saying for so long, and it's just with some examples. But I think Dave also has an acute awareness of what he's doing in a way that people dust over because they're like, well, he just sits and agrees. No, I think he very carefully sculpts the conversations in a way that he knows is going to play well with his audience.
Yeah, and this is why I don't like the, he's just in it for the money, he has no real political views kind of criticism, because I think if he was just accidentally interviewing only far right or interviewing like extremists, then he would interview extremists of all sorts. And it wouldn't be this consistent pattern of far right crazies getting polished. I do think he's sympathetic to some far right politics.
Or to such an extent that it plays no part in him determining any of his values. So he cares so little that he's willing to go completely to the most racist views and defend them.
How do you care so little that you defend the most racist people out there? I feel like you have to be sympathetic to do that.
Well, what you've got to understand about Dave is that at the end of the day, what is consistent in his whole career is he's a guy who's been trying to have popularity and fame for a long time.
And now he's complaining about being in the recent New York Times header image, you know, the article about YouTube radicalization. Dave, you wanted to be popular. There you go.
Well, this is it. It's like, and what you see throughout his whole career is trying a thing and that thing not working out or not going the way he wanted it to. And you see that repeating it over and over again. He tried to be a comedian. That didn't go the way he wanted it to. He tried to have like a Young Turks kind of show and it didn't really go the way he wanted it to.
And then he stabs people in the back. He's like such a terrible person too. Like,
yeah. So what you realize is when you get to the stage where you find something where now you have an audience, you have all the fans that you always wanted doing the other things you did, of course you're going to lean into that. Like there's no, and actually I understand it on a smaller scale, because look what's happened to my Twitter since I made the Dave Rubin videos. I've always tweeted about a bit of music, a bit of politics, a bit of this, a bit of that. Every time I tweet about music, I get the same like 1 or 2 likes that I was getting before. Whenever I tweet something about Dave Rubin, man, that blows up. Like every time.
Yes.
It's like, and amplify that effect by 1 million subscribers.
Yeah.
And someone with Dave Rubin's specific kind of longing for fame and, you know, relevancy. And the result is quite a natural thing, I think.
See, I had to go through that obviously on a smaller scale to Dave as well, because a lot of people followed me when I was like mainly critical of Islam.
Yeah, for sure.
Perhaps it attracted a lot of the wrong crowd. I always wanted to believe that there are some very like fair and liberal-minded people that are interested in good faith criticism of Islam. How wrong I was, though. I mean, obviously there are, but those people aren't like fetishizing ex-Muslims, right?
For sure.
So it seemed for a time that I had this audience that just hated me. So after Trump, I was like, I'm not going to focus on Islam because this is just like getting all these MAGA people in my mentions. And I really don't want anything to do with that. Like, I've never been about that. I've never been about demonizing Muslims. That's not what I'm about. So when I started tweeting more about the Western far right, these same people, I guess, who had followed me for being ex-Muslim and being critical of Islam, however right it was that whatever I was criticizing, they were following me for the wrong reason, because they wanted their like anti-Islam outrage porn or whatever, and they wanted to fetishize this person who grew up in Saudi Arabia who can say like, oh yeah, you know, I don't like this and whatever, I've lived through it or whatever. So it felt like if I ever said anything about Islam, I'd get like 100 likes or whatever. And then if I ever talked about Trump, like 2 likes, just like what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
But
and so this, yeah, it's and
I had to fight against that. Like, you know, I felt kind of sickened when I realized that that's what a lot of my audience was, or they were like hate following me. And so then I had to sort of push back against it, and it was hard, but it's possible, right? It was hard because you lose a lot of support when people are like, oh, you're not the person I thought you were. and then you lose Patreon support, especially when I became like vocally against the prophet of atheism, you know.
Yep.
That was like really hard because you get pylons. When I was like critical of Rubin in the early days, the amount of abuse I used to get, like when I was critical of Gad Sad, people calling me, you know, a sand N-word, C-U-N-T. I mean, it was bad. And only now, I think, in the last 6 months, maybe last year, I've come to a place where I've actually got a community of like left-leaning people that trust me despite my being ex-Muslim, that will signal boost me. You know, otherwise I had distrust from the left and hatred from the people who wanted me to only shit on Islam. And so I felt like, wow, this is awful. But you can do it. You can push back against it, not without a struggle, but you can.
I think the thing is as well, the longer it goes on with you not pushing back, the more courage it takes and the bigger the kind of pushback when you do so.
Dave has so much income to lose from pandering to the right that, you know, he'd have to, I don't know, lose a lot if he changed. But if he had any values, it would be hard to sleep at night doing what he's doing, you know, boosting homophobes and standing with Steven Crowder, and just I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, because of I guess his own sort of personality and the mildness of Dave Rubin the person. He doesn't have anything else really that would lend him credibility with his audience, apart from agreeing with people. That's kind of what he has.
That's his thing. But I do feel that he is angered. He's angered by diverse Google Doodles. He's angered by Islam. He's angered by, you know, immigration or whatever. Like, these are his personal values that he obviously doesn't make too clear. But if you follow him for long enough, you can tell that he is, like, he has values that he is following through in his show. Like, this isn't just some accident or some pandering, just pure, it is pandering. He's leaned into the pandering, but it also coincides with his own personal views. I mean, there were like older blog posts that people found, like, you know.
I was about to say, yeah, those, when I think when those got aired, everyone kind of was like, oh, so maybe he wasn't that liberal in the first place,
right,
even when he was on the Young Turks.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, but I think that's the thing. I would say even what I've realized since being so embedded in this world is even the right-wing kind of commentator sphere of the internet gets way more kind of extreme people than Dave. And those people who are more white nationalist types are not interested in Dave. He's not cutting it for them in the way he perhaps was during the Trump election. So he's not bold and far right enough to attract that audience anymore. And he's lost all credibility with any left-wing followers he would have had. So what you get is this kind of middle boomer tier following who are still there. But how long can that really last with him having the same conversation over and over again?
Oh, man, I asked that question like 3 years ago, and here we are. He's more popular than ever. And the thing is, like, people used to tell me, oh, he's just some dumb YouTuber. He's got no real influence. He's got nothing. Now he's like got, you know, Donald Trump Jr. watches his show and retweets him. And he's not insignificant. He's useful for them.
I saw a video where Dave was talking about how he got the Jordan Peterson gig, and the description of it is so Dave that I can't believe this is what happened. But Dave was hanging out with Jordan Peterson randomly at one of Jordan Peterson's shows, and he went and said to the management, how about I come out and do some jokes before Jordan goes on? And the management were like, okay. And so he went and did it, and they were like, oh, everyone loved those those jokes
Oh
about the
gosh,
left.
imagine the kind of
And-
audience you have to love Dave Rubin comedy.
And then the management of Jordan Peterson were like, who have you got managing you? And he was like, you, if you want. And it's like, so I think at each stage, he's always glued himself to the next person. And I guess it was Milo at the start. And then it became every sort of skeptic YouTuber. And then it became Jordan Peterson, and that's been the best move of his career.
And you see that even in his, when he challenges these reporters who call him right wing. I would host you on my show to debate Ben Shapiro at Jordan Peterson at never himself. He just tags in a bunch of his influential friends, and he's such a chicken shit.
No, but it's more like, why don't you say that to Ben Shapiro's face?
Oh yeah, that's right.
They're talking about you, Dave. Why don't they said it to you, not Ben Shapiro? Why are you bringing Ben in? He doesn't. He's irrelevant in this conversation. So I think all Dave really has is the association, and he seems to simultaneously adore it. And but I'm proud to be identified as someone standing with at Lauren Chen, at Lauren Southern, at all these people. But at the same time says, wait, but I don't agree with at Lauren Chen, at Lauren Southern on everything. Why would you think that? And it's this weird kind of both embracing and disavowing of all the people he hangs out with all the time. It's really wild.
Right. And you never seen Dave push back like he did on the Patreon guy for removing Lauren Southern from the platform. So, I mean, the people that say, oh, he just nods along to everything. No, he does not. Until he has reason to push back, or like David Frum criticizing Trump or whatever.
Well, there's another example that I didn't actually get to put in my videos because it didn't fit anywhere. But I think this really shows his duplicitous handling of the same issue when the context suits. So Dave Rubin had Sargon on his show in 2017. It's the interview where they talk about Trump and trolls. The context to this interview is that Sargon had done videos where he targeted feminists, often included some personal attacks. And then the feminists who were the subject of his videos would often be harassed, because if you've got an audience that are full-time internet boys and they hate feminism, how naturally are they going to react to you serving them up a fresh kind of target to go at? So that was the context. Dave talks to Sargon about trolls, and Dave says, you know what? I actually love the trolls. I don't really have a problem with them. You're using the tools of the liberals that they've used against us right back against them. And I think it's pretty great. So that gets said, which is maybe Dave, in that context, you could, if you're being charitable, assume he didn't know the extent of what the trolling meant. And he was just kind of going off what he knew. Then 2 weeks later, he has Lacey Green on the show. Lacey Green was a pop feminist who then turned skeptic and started saying loads of crap about feminists. So that was the point at which Dave decided, it's time to get her on the show. Now, what happened in the interim? So what happened in the interim was a photo had emerged of Lacey Green with Sargon of Akkad. And Dave wanted to talk about this as an example of how Sargon was very, open to collaboration with people of the left, very civil. But the question he asks doesn't actually go the way he expects. So he says, so I was talking to Sargon 2 weeks ago, and I knew that he'd done a few videos about you, and I just wanted to, I asked him, Lacey's going to be there. Are you a bit worried about that? And he said, well, I don't know why. I've not got any problem with her. It's nothing personal. And Lacey just kind of interrupts Dave and says, no, Dave, it was personal. And Dave looks at her like dumbfounded, deer in the headlights. And
somehow
then
he brought it back to the left, let me guess.
Well, so Lacey then does a very, almost like verging on tears, monologue.
Oh, no.
Where she says, well, yeah, the thing is, Dave, Sargon made a video where he said, I'd made up being sexually assaulted. And then she said, so at this time I started getting, real death threats. I do speeches, and these speeches would be kind of called off because of some death threat or rape threat that I had against me. And she was like, and we traced where these people were coming from who were sending me the threats, and they were all Sargon's fans. Like, they were all people who were subscribed to Sargon. Mm-hmm. And so she was like, so Sargon actually, by lying about me and making these videos, it had a real world effect on, my general well-being and health. So obviously this has not gone the way that Dave thinks it's going to go. He's dumbfounded. But the way Dave reacts is Dave says, oh, well, no, I didn't see any of his videos about you. Oh, yeah. Well, the thing is, so we agree on a lot of stuff. He's a classical liberal. He's a great guy.
Just brush it under the carpet and
he puts forward a load of compliments about Sargon, at once saying that he doesn't know about it, and then also defending Sargon. And it's just a really weird reaction. And that's the point. It's points like that where you're like, no, he is aware. He completely is aware.
He was hoping for it to go a different way, and it didn't. And he wanted to move past that.
But not only that, now the audience are hearing, I guess, the other side. He then has to provide cover fire and say a load of compliments about the person in order to correct the balance of, criticism has been leveled at a friend of the show. Let's put a load more opinions in there on the other side to say that what they're doing is fine. Right.
There are so many layers of awfulness to Dave Rubin. There are so many layers.
But that's it.
Yeah, as I'm sure you know, you're quite the expert on Dave Rubin. One last question I wanted to ask you before you had to go was,
sure.
I did a video on Dave like a couple of years ago, not at all slick or with nice music or nice graphics or anything, because I don't know video editing at all. So somebody did it for me, and it was just like a quick. I think you mentioned that you've seen it.
I think the arguments in that video maybe started off a lot of the criticism of Rubin as we know it today, because it was the first one, and I think the guy who you did it with, is it Alex Katz?
Alex Katz, yeah, where I played like a Rubin apologist, and that's what I wanted to do. Like, I was so frustrated always of having that same patience, trying to engage with Rubin fans and trying to like have an honest conversation with them, and they would just like lob the same dishonest criticism. So I just wanted to like get that out of the way, be the Rubin fan for once, and just touch those excuses. So yeah, I wanted to talk about the differences in Dave Rubin then and Dave Rubin now, or if you've noticed any. Or
yeah, so I actually think the exact things that you and Alex talked about in your video continue to be present in everything we see now. But I think the difference is 2 years of him doing the show versus 4 years of him doing the show. Because now there is a whole catalogue of appearances to choose from where he's exhibited those same behaviors over and over again. And I think there's also this new phenomenon now of, the new phenomenon, I guess, is everyone on the left is constantly making jokes about him, and it's quite funny.
But it's not just the left, though. He's united people on the right, people all over the political spectrum that are joking about Dave Rubin. There's this thing called Freedom Tunes or something that did like a Dave Rubin cartoon, and I believe that's a right-wing cartoon show on YouTube, right, where he's just like, I agree.
Yeah. But it's not just that. I think it's I get a lot of, so I don't always check the comments on my videos, but every now and then I peep in. A lot of commenters are saying that they've been very put off by his recent reactions to criticism. And that's the thing that has almost led them down, a thinking trail of, maybe he's not this balanced guy that I kind of thought. And I think for a long time, Dave's strategy, and definitely when you put out your video, the strategy had been rallying up his base to come and defend him online, go and put forward the counter arguments, often by tagging the journalist and just saying, everyone just go and tell this journalist what you think of their shoddy analysis of me. And for a long time, that has held, it's worked for him. I think because of the ludicrousness of him claiming that Quillette is launching a left-wing partisan attack on him.
Those hippies at Quillette.
Yeah, I think the sheer...
That's what he called them, right? In one of his live streams on Twitter.
Yeah, the brazenness of arguing that whilst doing a Periscope, walking down the road and saying,
the race
just
science hippies of Quillette.
Yeah, he's like, they're just jealous of me because I'm so successful, and me and you guys, we've got such a tight bond, and they're jealous of us. It's like, I think for a lot of people who have any, who are grown-ups, I guess, can see that as the kind of high school drama thing that it is, and it's a really weird way to react for anyone of Dave's age, never mind someone who's running a political show where they're meant to discuss ideas.
Right. And it's funny because I've seen some people that have actually benefited from Rubin's platform, people that have been on his show, like ex-Muslims and stuff, see your videos. And I guess because you've made it deliberately to appeal to them and sort of, I guess, praise Weinstein or whatever IDW characters, I guess it's made it palatable enough for them to watch. So good for you on that, because believe me, they were out there defending Rubin on the same shit for years. But I think, just like you said, how with Quillette, like he's ruining the whole credibility thing for them, the veneer of some sort of liberal cred. I think so with some ex-Muslims who defended him too in the past. He's ruining it for them, so they have to drop him. Like, especially when he comes after their buds Quillette, then they're like, hell no. It's the veneer of even just being a grown-up. I think that's probably what shatters it for a lot of people, is he's not even reacting in a normal kind of adult who has a career in commentary sort of way. Right, let alone the cool-headed rational that they all want to see themselves as.
That's it, I think.
But what was the funniest to me is that some people were like, but actually, I mean, your video's all right, Timbah, but one thing you really miss is how Dave Rubin is all the fault of the left. Like I don't know if you remember that, but that I saw a couple people say that too. It was cracking me up. Like, you really missed an opportunity to talk about what brought about the need for a show like Rubin. And I mean, they're obviously insinuating that the left and SJWs, and it's all their fault, The most bizarre Dave Rubin criticism I've ever heard.
It's more like if you want to analyze why there's a need for Dave Rubin's show, then should we also analyze why there was a need for social justice in the first place? Then we go back and analyze why there was a need for laws and why there was a need for protective classes. And you can't go back and list every reason why every single thing happened. I think it's an attempt, if you can't find fault with the video itself, to say, you missed this, or you didn't accurately talk about each of Tommy Robinson's crimes and how each of them has a specific reason why he committed them. And it's just like, well, yeah, that would be really hard to do in the sort of breeze past kind of 5 minutes still I was talking about them. So
right. It also fits in so nicely with the whole everything is the fault of the left theme that Rubin has going on anyway.
Because I would say, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's easy to look at Rubin's platform and say, well, Rubin's, it's just because of Hack Rubin running it. Arguably as well, sort of any platform that appeals to notions of freedom and these very abstract things that in themselves are neither of the left or the right. If a show did that, it wouldn't really have an audience, because that's not what we're here on the internet for. And so I often look at the Rubin Report as a fascinating story of the inevitable happening. And it's almost in itself the fact that Rubin started off with this platform where he was trying to be something or pretending to be something, but ended up just pivoting really hard into the most extremist content imaginable.
Pretending.
It's quite a good.
I'm going to go with pretending.
Yeah, it's quite a good metaphor for just generally how rhetoric on the internet works and the kind of content that you need to make in order to make people gravitate towards you.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've had a good hour and a half of dissecting the depths of Dave Rubin's amazing mind. So
it's been fun. Yeah, I think although his mind doesn't have that many ideas in it, throughout his actions, you can actually trace some really interesting stuff there. I think it's worth talking about.
Well, it can actually hold 3 high-level ideas per day, right? Did you ever see that one from his Reddit? Like, I think I tweeted it. It's like a picture of Jordan Peterson sitting by his bedside. He's in the hospital, and there's a doctor like giving him some medicine, and it says he can only have like 3 high-level ideas per day or something.
The quality of the memes has just gone up so much, and kind of keeps getting better as even within the formats that we've already created. There's new subgroups of Dave Rubin memes based on different things. It's really odd. It's really odd the turn it's taken. I don't think we could have predicted it maybe 2 years ago. But I've got to say, they do say that Dave Rubin's like biggest critics are his biggest fans. Because I can confirm that, man. I fucking love Dave Rubin. Like I can't get enough of hearing him do his periscopes. And whenever he does a periscope, for me, it's essential content. I'm like, wow, what's he gonna say?
Yeah, it's true.
And if he says the same things as always, it's funny to me. If he says new things, it's also funny to me.
Right. Okay, so we're going to start a Dave Rubin fan club. Okay, stay tuned, everyone.
It already exists in the Dave Rubin subreddit.
Oh.
It's been lovely to chat.
It's been excellent chatting with you. Take care, and everyone give Timbah a follow. And make more vids.
I will get to it when I can.
All right, take care.
Thanks very much.
Bye. A quick shout out to Intellectual Dark Wave, who makes IDW critical themed Dark Wave, and it's pretty hilarious, actually. I'll end with a clip, and I'll link to their channel in the show notes, so do check it out. Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/Nice Mangoes. No Ian Mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @Nice Mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no Ian Mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too.